All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So it is Meta Monday once again. I gotta be honest. I'm tired. I don't know. I'm doing this kind of late. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if I'm just going to be calm or if I'm going to be completely incompetent. So I'm sticking with for now, continuing to review every video on YouTube on meta ethics. And we're going to go further than that. We're going to review them all. Of course, I'm overstating. Of course, I'm not going to review them all. That's insane. There's hundreds of them. But no, I'm serious. I'm going to review them all. And after that, what do we got? Podcasts. Then what do I do? Articles and books. We'll read them all. We'll read them all. Every book, every article. Okay, that's impossible. They come out at a faster rate than I could review them. So yeah, I'm gonna be kind of chill today. That didn't sound very chill, did it? We got Patrick here. Hey, Patrick, 1,000 land salute for you. Sapir gets 500, and Through the Lens gets 250. Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. People talking about the new background. There's just a couple cactuses. I'm going to be moving again this weekend. I've lost track now. I think it's somewhere between 10 and 12 moves in the past 12 years or so. So on average, about once a year. Often it's clustered, so I'll move 2 or 3 times in a short period. This will be a pretty easy one relative to some of the others, but I'll have to be moving the setup again. And I got posters for the background, so you'll have to wait to see what I got. And I'm thinking about what kind of decorations now that I have a bookshelf with no books in it. So I do have books, but I am intentionally refusing to put books on the bookshelf because I don't like that whole signaling how you've got like a library of books. I read PDFs. I got physical books in a few places. Sometimes that's the only copy I have, but I'm not about books. All right. David Hume, you're too late for the loot. Sorry. All right, don't hit the loot. I'm doing okay. I have a couple announcements. So, someone did donate for me to buy a mic arm, and then I had to wait to get a cord, and now I'm just waiting. It's finally on the computer. I take forever to get things done, so I'll announce, like I'll double check with them to make sure I can say, hey, this is who spent the money on that. I also got like a filter for the microphone. It doesn't fit super well, so I'm not sure if I'm going to end up using that. But the arm is awesome. So the arm, well, there's too much of a mess in that direction, but the arm is right there. I think I might have showed it in one of the streams. But I have a bigger. I'll check with somebody else. Someone got me something very cool. So I don't know if they want me like saying, "Hey, this is who did this," and it's super awesome of them. So we'll see. Oh, you could actually see. Oh, this side. I always get the sides mixed up. Over there, that's the stand I put my phone on when I'm doing the TikTok lives. I haven't done one in like 6 months. So they're going to be coming out. Let's do this week, because I've been saying I'm going to make it. Let me make a note of that. I'm going to make a note because I'll say I'm going to do it and then I don't. So I'll post one this week, probably Thursday or something. Spreads it out from doing stuff on Monday. Did I make a note properly? Yeah, I did. Okay, cool. All right, everybody. There's a lot of you in the chat. We gotta get this channel, moving. We gotta get me up in the subscription count. How does that work? So, I'm now on, this is what, my 102nd video, and I have like hundreds of hours at this point of video, like what, 200 hours, whatever it is. And I'm at 1.7. I just hit 1.7 thousand. So I got 700 subscribers in a year. I suspect if I was making videos that were anywhere from under a minute, like a bunch of those, to videos that were 5 to 15 minutes, that might boost the channel a lot. But it's not my style. So I could try. More TikToks promoting it. Well, that really hasn't worked very well. So going on TikTok, getting people on TikTok to come over to YouTube doesn't seem to work well. Remember Danny over at Phil Talk, that they're like almost separate places. There's not a lot of crosstalk. So I don't know what's up with that. Anyway, Yeah. So Sapir saying clicking like. Yeah. But I don't want to like. I don't want to say, hey, remember to hit the hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification. I hate it telling people that. YouTube should be doing that for us. You know what I mean? Like it should be better at figuring that out. Okay, so yeah, see, look at this, Ekman. Maybe try small videos like there's no free will and there are no objective moral facts. I could. I'm really wary of doing like clickbaity titles, like nothing is morally wrong, or yeah, some of them I might not be able to get away with. Like some inside jokes about meta ethics, like it's okay to do some bad thing. Of course, I don't actually think that, so it'd be super misleading. Yeah, so Pierce says you have to be cringe sometimes. Unfortunately, can't handle it. Can't handle it. I can't. If I'm naturally cringe, then I am. But forced cringe, that's double cringe. Yeah, I'm not gonna. I don't. I don't. No, thank you. Through the lens says you need public controversy, get canceled. I sure hope not. Uh, all right. So here's I have the video up. I have a few videos, and I was actually going to just look at short parts of a couple videos and see where that gets us. So let's do that. What is our first one? Boop, 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 boop. Here it is. So this is a video on unmatched philosophy. I was on there like a year ago, and this actually is very recent. When was this from? This is 4 days ago, so very very recent. And there's an interesting remark that Mike Humer makes about intuitions, and it's really a topic I want to get into more. Is intuitions. It was a topic I was interested in when I was in grad school for philosophy, like philosophical methods and intuitions. At the time, I had found this book by Herman Capellan called A Philosophy Without Intuitions, and he argues that philosophers, as a matter of fact, historically speaking, don't really use intuitions in the ways that a lot of philosophers these days seem to take themselves to use them. I don't know what to make exactly of that argument. I know a lot of people had a very negative reaction to it, but I think that there are interesting questions about what intuitions are and how they're being used and how philosophers are using the term. I've also been reading some Bingson articles that are trying to defend the use and place of intuitions within philosophy. So far, I'm not finding them very convincing, but I at least want to sort of revisit articles that have come out since because that was back in 2012. And there had been some stuff at the time. Timothy Williamson has some good and interesting stuff to say on intuitions. And there were other people at the time, but there's been more recent developments, and I really got to refresh on those. Okay. Couple more comments, and then we'll get into this video. I'm not going to review the whole thing. I'm just going to look at part of it. I'll be honest, unfortunately, sorry, JPW says, I'll be honest, unfortunately, like and subscribe is probably the way. I found you through the algorithm, I'm guessing related to my end with Digital Gnosis channel. Yeah, appearances on other channels is probably a big way to get a subscriber bump too. But I don't want to appear on someone's channel to get subscribers. I would only want to appear on a channel because there's like a legitimate reason to talk to the person on that channel. I mean, and that's hard to swing. So we'll see. There's definitely going to be more interviews, debates, and those sorts of things as the semester comes to a close. So that'll be about a month. So through the Christmas break, I'll probably do a few interesting things. Then I'll probably take a break after that. So I was saying, oh, maybe I'll take a break, but I think I'll do it after that. Get some good stuff in before I take a break. Not just reaction videos. All right, let's get into the video, see what they have to say. Let's check volume first.
Facts to be something queer for metaphysical reasons, but for that also the epistemic reason. So what is a moral intuitions, or what is that? Yeah.
Good question. Some of the critics of intuitionism in the 20th century would say things like they don't think anyone has intuition. There are no intuitions.
So the first thing he says, so he's being asked about what Mike Humer here is being asked about what intuitions are. He's saying in the 20th century, some people said that we don't have intuitions. I am curious who he's talking about that said that we don't have intuitions. Who are those people? Because I'd like to look into that some more.
But that appears to be because they just didn't know what we meant. And
so that's an interesting claim. So in the 20th century, who was this? Was this other philosophers? Because it strikes me as somewhat implausible that philosophers would say, yeah, people don't have intuitions. And the reason that they were saying this is because they misunderstood what proponents of intuitions were saying that intuitions are. You'll see he says, he'll make a further comment here that I also have questions about. I don't know if he's right or wrong here, but I'm skeptical.
Like the way that philosophers use, the way intuitionists use the word intuition is not necessarily the way that people use it in ordinary language.
You see, so that's it. This gives the impression that critics that were claiming that people don't have intuitions were mistakenly thinking that the way that philosophers use it is that they were using it in one or more ways that it's used in ordinary language. And perhaps they were using it in some of those ways, but there are these common colloquial uses of intuition talk in ordinary language. And you might think of it as like this kind of sixth sense feeling, like, like Spider-Man's danger sense or something like that, like a spider sense for detecting danger. Like you have this gut feeling, you have this vibe. I'm skeptical that if that is what humor has in mind, that critics are saying, well, this folk notion of intuition, we don't really have that. And so we don't have intuitions. Because you could go back to people like John Stuart Mill makes frequent reference to intuition. Schiller, I think, criticizes philosophical usage of intuitions. And, we're talking people, well over a century ago making these sorts of remarks. And they do seem to be taking them. So it's not even 20th century. It's like even 19th century. They do appear to be taking themselves to be referring to uses of intuition that are distinctive to philosophy. That when I say distinctive, I mean they are critiquing the use of intuitions as philosophers are using them, whether or not the way that those philosophers are using them do or do not correspond to any folk or ordinary usage of the notion of intuition. What I mean by that is you could think there are ordinary uses of intuition, and then there's philosophical uses of intuition, and they are distinct from one another. And critics mistakenly took philosophers to be using the folk notion of intuition when actually they were using some philosophical notion that's different from the folk notion. But it's possible that there's a few things that are possible. It's possible that in ordinary language, there are a variety of ways in which people use the term intuition, and that philosophers are using one or more of those ways that it's used in ordinary language. It's still nevertheless the case that the critics could mistakenly think, so let's say you have like the set of folk usages, we'll call them A, B, C, D. Let's say philosophers are using form A, and the critics that are claiming people don't have intuitions are saying, well, people don't have, B, C, and D. Okay, well, if philosophers are saying people have A, then they're still actually making a claim that is present in ordinary language. And this roughly tracks like what Bingson is trying to say in saying that they're not using it as a technical term, they're using it as a discriminative term. I'm actually skeptical of that because I think that in some of the ways that philosophers use the term intuition don't actually map on to any, at least commonly used ordinary language version of the term intuition. I also take this to be an empirical question. So I think that there's a presumption on the part of somebody saying, it's discriminative and there's like these specific usages. In any case, I would wonder who humor is talking about. These claims are not really being made. I mean, they're being made in a conversational context. So if humor were writing this down, we might see citations, references, quotes, examples of people talking this way. I don't know what humor has in mind in terms of the proportion of philosophers making these mistakes. And it wouldn't surprise me if we found philosophers that mistakenly thought, yeah, philosophers are talking about the ordinary language notion B, C, or D, and that's not a real thing. So people don't really have intuitions. And then they just meant they don't have B, C, or D, but actually philosophers meant A, and they have A. Probably some philosophers that made that mistake, but how many? And why is he focused on them? What about ones that say we don't have intuitions of the kind that he's going to go on to describe? I suspect that there are philosophers that think that way, but in any case, that's going to be a question for digging through, the history of, I guess you could say, like recent analytic philosophy. I guess it's all recent if he's talking the past century. I guess I could say Western philosophy or Anglophone philosophy, even if it sort of predates when we would say, there was this when we start calling it analytic philosophy. In any case,
language, okay. And the way that we use it, there is no question whether we have intuitions or not.
That's what I want to take issue with. So let's go back to the start of that, because I know I interrupted that a few times. So we could get up to this point, and then I'll pause here again.
Necessarily, just didn't. They would say
is a moral intuitions, or what is that? Yeah.
Yeah, good question. Some of the critics of intuitionism in the 20th century would say things like they don't think anyone has intuition. There are no intuitions, but that appears to be because they just didn't know what we meant. And so, like the way that philosophers use, the way intuitionists use the word intuition is not necessarily the way that people use it in ordinary language. Okay. And the way that we use it, there is no question whether we have intuitions or not.
I question it. So there is a question. So he's going to go on to talk about what these kinds of intuitions are. I don't find his explanation here to be sufficient. And I do question whether people have intuitions of the kind that he describes. This has been a conversation I've been having on Substack and a few other places recently. The way that philosophers go about describing intuitions, it is super variable. It's super inconsistent. They use them in a variety of different ways. There doesn't seem to be any consistency or systematicity in the way in which they employ their terminology. Sometimes they seem to refer to some sort of like non-inferential, non-doxastic state, something like that. Sometimes they seem to be referring to dispositions to believe things. Sometimes they're just referring to beliefs themselves. Some philosophers will claim that intuitions are just a mundane feature of our ordinary psychology. They're continuous with other sorts of psychological processes that we already have. Some describe them as a quasi-perceptual faculty. Some of them refer to pre-theoretical intuitions. Some refer to intuitions one has on reflection. Some of them call them philosophical intuitions. Some of them refer to them as seemings or distinctively intellectual seemings, whatever that means. So you have a variety of types of terminology, of characterizations, of definitions, of accounts. Nobody seems to agree on anything. Very few philosophers seem to be actively discussing this, and the ones that do, almost all of them seem to be giving different accounts from one another. So what are intuitions? I don't know, and I don't think philosophers know. I think that philosophers take stances on what quote unquote intuitions are, but the term is used without any semblance of rigor or consistency, both across, like between philosophers, or I suspect even for an individual philosopher. And that's a problem. The other problem is that this looks like psychological terminology, and yet there's been, as far as I could tell, little or no effort to establish what psychological processes are involved in intuitions. If these are, if this is some type of psychological, if this is referring to some psychological phenomena, then it falls within the domain of psychology, and it should be something that we could study empirically. And yet I've seen very little by way of empirical study of what intuitions are. So a lot of experimental philosophy seems to be, it's sometimes even defined as the study of philosophical intuitions. But what makes something an intuition as opposed to some other type of psychological process? What makes something a philosophical intuition as opposed to some other kind of intuition? I don't really know if there's good answers to that. I think a lot of philosophers might say that these questions are irrelevant, and that the empirical considerations here just aren't really all that important in establishing what these are. That we can kind of use the language to refer to, we can use intuition talk to characterize a certain subset of judgments or attitudes or beliefs or whatever we want to call these intuitions. If we don't want to call them something else, we could just call them intuitions. It's picking out some type of psychological process. The term is a placeholder. Even if we don't know exactly what processes are involved, what we can at least do is employ them in the relevant intellectual contexts, and then we don't need to know what they are. So, if you and I were having a discussion, and I was telling you, well, I recall this, I remember that, I was telling you about things that I remember. Like, oh, well, we have to get this and this and this at the store. I remember that we were supposed to. It'd be a little strange for someone to say, okay, but like what psychological processes are involved in memory? Like, give me the account or the theoretical model, like the scientific model of memory processes. I was like, I don't know. I'm not a cognitive psychologist that studies memory. Oh, well, then why should we even believe that you have memories? Well, we could test whether I have memories. So, you know, I don't know that a person really needs to have a comprehensive model of particular types of psychological processes to use them. And so a proponent of intuitions could say, I don't really need a model of intuitions. I know I've got them. We all talk about them. We all use them. We could get by with them. Now, the thing is, something like memory, there are cognate terms. I haven't even checked this, but with most languages, there's 7,000 languages in the world. I bet almost all those languages have terminology that are cognate terms, are something very close to memory as an English term. And memory can be studied empirically. We can look at the processes, and we have looked at the processes, and we've learned a lot about memory. So if there were any doubts, like if we hadn't done that, then I might have started raising doubts about memory, but it has been done. And so we have established memory as a legitimate type of psychological process, or in fact, processes, because, there's working memory and long-term memory. There's different types of memory. And the existence, function, nature, and role that memory plays, those have all been, they're not perfectly well established, but they're established to a point that it would be ridiculous to deny that there are different types of memory and that these are real phenomena. Has the same been done for intuitions? As far as I can tell, no. And so it remains ripe for psychological inquiry to question what exactly is going on when people say that they have intuitions. They can, it's fine for someone to say, there's no question we're referring to something, but what is it that we're referring to? What if it just turns out intuitions are a type of belief? What, like, just philosophers just use language in a funny way, and they're just talking about a certain cluster of beliefs they have, beliefs that play roles in philosophical discussions. Well, then there's just a mundane sort of thing that's, totally like my belief that 2 + 2 = 4, or fire is hot, or my name is Lance. Like, it's just, there's things I believe, and then there's philosophical beliefs that I have. But I don't think that they're like that. And I think that, at least some of them, sometimes it might be used in a way synonymous with belief. But they do seem to have uses that seem to have this phenomenological feel to them. Right? It looks like philosophers are describing them in that way. And I think that it may very well be a kind of mirage, a kind of phenomenological mirage that's born of the particular way philosophers are trained to think, and how they, what they read, how they think, and how they're enculturated into philosophical practices. Okay, so before I continue, let me have a look at the chat, see what people are up to here. All right. Patrick says, Lance, intuition talk goes back further if you extend it to conscience talk. Well, what are you talking about? How far back? Yeah, I haven't really dug into the history of intuition talk. So Pierre says, so far it sounds a bit like another candidate for something to be a quietist about, an idiosyncratic, empty, technical, philosophical term. Yeah, so I don't know that some of them are going to deny it's a technical term, like Bingson. I don't know if it's idiosyncratic. I'm open to the possibility, at least at the moment, that philosophers employing this terminology are picking out some distinctive type of psychological states. It's just, if they are, I want to know what those distinctive states are. And if the other ones want to say that they're not distinctive, okay, why not? Is if they want to say that it's irrelevant, all this like psychological speculation, why? I don't know. I don't see why it would be irrelevant. I'm happy to talk a bit about why I do think it's relevant. So at least one reason would be that different psychological processes may be more or less reliable depending on the underlying cognitive mechanisms involved in those processes. Some of them may be subject to certain sorts of biasing influences that others aren't. Some of them, maybe, in other words, some of them might be better at tracking whatever it is they're supposed to track than others. So what if, just hypothetically, moral intuitions were consistently produced by unreliable psychological processes, but linguistic intuitions were produced by reliable psychological processes? Then on reflection, we would have reason to trust, to at least a greater degree, relatively greater degree, philosophical intuitions that involve judgments about, whether a concept applies in a particular case or not, but not in moral judgments, like whether something's morally right or wrong. Now, that's just a hypothetical example, but the point there would just be understanding the processes involved in our judgments can be, and sometimes is, relevant to assessing their sort of epistemic status. So, one example of a philosopher that's already really pushed this line is Josh Green. So Josh Green is a proponent of the dual process model of moral cognition. So The dual process model of moral cognition is based very similar to the more general dual process model of human cognition. So roughly what these models propose is that you have these two different types, two different systems. You have system one, system two. System one is this fast, automatic, heuristic-based. It's often driven by emotion. It's quicker. There's less deliberation. It's less. It's less rule-based. It's less, following some series of inferential steps to arrive at a conclusion. It's just bam, bing, bam, boom, deliver an output. Whereas system two is this slow, deliberative, rule-based, like you stop, okay. So that would be like reasoning through modus ponens or something like that. So the dual process model of moral cognition more or less holds that we have systems like that for making moral judgments, and that the outputs of these systems they lean more towards deontology in the case of the first system. So that fast, emotion-based, heuristic-based, automatic process is more inclined towards delivering deontological or rule-based outputs in our judgments, like pushing a person off the footbridge in that version of the trolley problem is just wrong. Like, you shouldn't do it. So that locates the rightness or wrongness of actions in the actions themselves or whatever principles underlie the actions. Alternatively, the system two, this more deliberative, slow, rule-based approach, makes moral judgments more in line with consequentialism. So it's going to factor in outcomes or considerations. Sometimes people might say utilitarian. So it's going to be concerned with optimizing for utility or happiness, maximizing happiness and partially minimizing suffering. And so Josh Green marshals a variety of forms of evidence. So he has, studies where they put people under cognitive load and then we're likely to give deontological judgment. So in other words, like you might do something like this. You might ask someone, one group of people, you say, okay, we're going to have you memorize 3 letters. So 6, 2, 3 or 1, 7, 8. And then you got to memorize those, go in another room and then like do a task. And then another group of people might have to remember a sequence of, say, 7 digits. I don't know if this is exactly the type of cognitive load approach that you could also put people under time pressure and different sorts of things. So basically, if you give people a long, like 7, 8, 3, 4, 6, 1, 1, 2, that's going to be harder to recall. And so if you're investing cognitive resources in memorizing a larger sequence of numbers, then you have comparatively less resources free for making moral decisions. And people that are under greater cognitive load or under time pressure, the idea would be that they're more likely to make deontological judgments because their system two system is being like otherwise occupied, something like that. So the idea here is that you can use a variety of empirical tools to show that there are these two distinguishable psychological systems that are involved in making moral judgments. Okay, now I'm skeptical that the dual process model holds up to scrutiny, but suppose it does. I mean, Green really did gather a lot of evidence for this. I think it's a very cool way of doing this kind of research. So even if the model doesn't withstand scrutiny, I do think it's a step in the right direction for this kind of research. Now, once you have that kind of model, you can then ask a question of, are there systematic differences in the reliability of those systems? And if you could show, for instance, that the deontological system is more subject to biases, more subject to factors that cause it to deliver the outputs that it delivers, that on reflection, we would judge to be irrelevant. So there'd be some normative or philosophical considerations that come into play here, and that these are comparatively less of a factor in the utilitarian outputs. Then we could say, okay, well, we should trust the judgments of system two or the utilitarian output more than we should trust the judgments of system one, the ontological outputs. And therefore, this means that we should trust our utilitarian judgments when it comes to a conflict between utilitarian and deontological judgments than deontological judgments. And this is supposed to provide some evidence for utilitarianism as a view. Now, there's been critics of this type of approach, that this approach of combining empirical evidence with philosophical claims. I think something like this could roughly work in principle. Like if you could show certain psychological processes are the result of compromised cognitive systems, it could undermine the evidentiary status of those particular processes. So when it comes to saying we have intuitions, it's a little weird to treat them as a category without wondering whether the outputs of different types of intellectual seemings or philosophical intuitions or whatever terms you want to use to refer to them, how would one know whether they're all the output of one particular cognitive process or cognitive system, I guess you could say, or module, however you want to put it. There actually might be differences in the way different people use that terminology. But Are they the result of one type of cognitive system or mechanism, or are they a result of multiple mechanisms? And if so, which mechanisms and when, and how do we find out? Because if the functioning of those different processes could potentially differ, then that opens up the possibility that some intuitions are more reliable than others. And so not knowing which processes are involved in those intuitions seems to me like a problem, because we're not entitled to simply presume that if we label a bunch of things intellectual seemings or philosophical intuitions, that therefore they're the result of the same psychological processes. We're not in a position to know that. That's not something that you would have any sort of immediate introspective access to. So this is not a question of armchair philosophy or a priori considerations or just reasoning about it. It's an empirical question. Which processes are involved in the intuitions in any particular case of doing philosophy? And philosophers they're just not entitled to just presume that they know. These are empirical questions. Okay. All right, looking through the comments. Yeah, so Patrick says, genuinely, I wouldn't mind hearing someone ask, can you explain the phenomenology to me? Like, is it to the left of your eye, like an old memory, or is it in your gut, like a nausea? Yeah, I would be very curious to hear from philosophers that claim to have intellectual seemings or philosophical intuitions, what the phenomenology is like. I'll get to that as we play more of the video. All right, let's have a look at a bit more of this.
Right. So, okay, well, so there's a theory and then there's like examples. So, okay, so the theory is, well, there's a certain type of mental state called an appearance. This is what happens when you say.
You see, there's a theory that there's a certain kind of mental state called an appearance. Now, note that humor just before this. Take it back so you can see what he says.
Okay, well, so there's a theory and then there's like examples. Use it. There is no question whether we have intuitions or not.
There's no question whether we have intuitions.
Right. So, okay, well, so there's a theory and then there's like examples. So, okay, so the theory is, well, there's a certain type of mental state called an appearance.
Okay, so is he saying that there's no question that there's a certain type of mental state called an appearance? Because I question that. What exactly is an appearance? Like, I don't know if models in cognitive science actually use the notion of an appearance. They don't have to use that term. If there's some analog term used in cognitive science, I'd say, okay, then cool. Cognitive scientists generally agree that there are appearances, but I'm not sure that there are appearances. So, there are certain ways that we talk. We might say, it appears to me that, it appears to me that there's a tree over there. Some sort of, I'm appealing to some sensory type of experience I might be having. But I could also say, it appears to me that 17 is a prime number. So I could refer to something that is non-sensorial and likewise call it an appearance. Does that mean that there's some commonality in the psychological processes involved in those two reports? No, I don't think so. And I'm not sure that humor is saying that there is. He might think of intellectual seemings as distinct from, percepts or sensorial seemings. So we'll see what he says.
This is what happens when you say something seems true to you or appears true. You're having a certain kind of mental state, a certain kind of experience, which represents it.
See, I'm not saying that. If I say something like I use seems, looks, seems to be, appears, I'm not saying I have any specific mental states. So I don't know why he's saying this. But what I find really puzzling is he says there's no question. There's no question. What are these mental states? And when have the empirical sciences established that people have them? Is this a specific kind of mental state? And is it distinct from the mental states that would figure into other sorts of model? Like, is it a belief? Like, we could use terminology to pick out clusters of certain types of psychological processes. I don't know if I'd want to call, I don't like this idea of mental states. I think that might be reifying functions or processes as if they are distinct things. So I'm not even sure I think there are mental states. So when he says there's no question, and then he starts talking about mental states, I've got questions. So what does he mean there's no question? There's all kinds of questions one could have about this sort of thing. So it could be that there are multiple junctures at which what he's saying is open to question and is in fact currently being questioned by people in the cognitive sciences and in philosophy. I'm not sure that there are. It's really going to depend a lot on what he means by mental state, whether there's a question of whether we have those or not. But there's also a question of whether these are, do they have a sui generis phenomenology? Or do they involve the deployment of distinct psychological processes that are autonomous or semi-independent of other psychological processes? Like, hearing and seeing are not the same thing. Is this another sort of thing where it's distinct psychologically? Is it distinct neurophysiologically? Like, there's a lot of questions here. So when he says there's no question, there might not be a question in his mind, or he may be satisfied that there's no legitimate doubts about whether we have intuitions of this kind. But I have legitimate doubts. At least I think my doubts are legitimate. Maybe he thinks they're illegitimate. But of course, that's something that I don't have to agree on. Just look, if I said there is no question that moral realism is not true, like someone could just be like, I don't agree. So, humor is making this claim as if it's a done deal. I don't think that it is.
It is being true. Now, I guess that there are other accounts that people have, like they think that it's a disposition to believe or something like that. But okay, right. But that doesn't matter. What matters is, like whatever your analysis of seems or appears, when you have an intuition, like when you have an ethical intuition, you're saying that some ethical proposition seems true to you, and it's not the result of.
Yeah. So you're. It doesn't. I'm puzzled at him saying it doesn't matter. So to me, it matters what exactly we're talking about here. What psychological processes are involved in what we're referring to? Like just because you call it something, if we all call it the same thing, it doesn't mean we're referring to the same sorts of processes.
Of argument. Intuition, like when you have an ethical intuition, you're saying that some ethical proposition seems true to you, and it's not the result of argument. Right.
So I think what he's getting at here is that, well, whatever your account of intuitions, it's not an inference, and that's fair. So, whether you think it's a disposition to believe, or it's a belief, or it's some sui generis psychological state, whatever it is, generally speaking, people agree that the type of state in question is not the result of some type of inference. So we could at least say whatever we're talking about, it's a non-inferential psychological state. And if you don't like the term psychological state, you can even regard that as a placeholder that would be consistent with something that a functionalist isn't going to run screaming from, or like some sort of even some sort of eliminativist about psychological phenomena wouldn't run like you. Okay, fine, reduce it. Strip out all the language you don't like. We could talk about some descriptive claim about how people are disposed to behave or something. So, whatever we're doing with that language, we could all agree that whatever it is, it's non-inferential. That seems fine to me. So I don't have a huge problem with that, what he's saying at this point. So if the claim is there's no question that there's like a specific type of mental state, I think there is a question. If the question is, if he's saying, hey, there's no question that there's like some non-inferential stuff that we do, and that when we're judging, like, hey, look, when I tell you murder is wrong, I'm not like inferring that from an argument. Whatever is causing me to judge that that's wrong, it's not inferential. And if that's the case, then I got to say, I think I just agree with humor here. And I think that might be the more charitable read on what he's saying, because it's like he started with an analysis, and he's like, yeah, there's other analyses. They all converge on this specific consideration that at the very least, there are these non-inferential outputs that we have. So do we have non-inferential outputs? I think so. Maybe we don't. Maybe someone could question that. I'm not questioning that presently. And so maybe I'm coming around to thinking, yeah, what he's describing, there's not really, I don't personally think there's strong reason to question whether there's these like sort of non-inferential states. There is a question about what exactly is going on, and maybe he would just agree with that. So maybe, I don't know. What do you think in the chat? So I think I'm coming around to thinking, I don't really have a huge problem with what he's saying here. But what I will say is that once we start giving those analyses about what intuitions are, I'm going to have problems with some of them. And there's a good chance I'm going to have problems with the kinds of things, he considers intuitions to be. So particular accounts may have problems that other accounts don't. And that's why at least one place I think I disagree with him is where he says it's not really going to matter. Well, let's look at exactly what he says here.
And like when you intuit, when you have an ethical intuition, or what I said,
Right. This point.
There are other accounts that people have, like they think that it's a disposition to believe or something like that. But okay, but that doesn't matter.
So he says, but that doesn't matter. I think it probably is going to matter. So different sorts of accounts are going to be able to sustain different types of. They're going to be able to support different types of philosophical theories to a greater or lesser extent. If intuitions are the sort of things I think might match what philosophers are talking about with intuitions, are not going to provide the kind of, they're not going to be able to support ethical intuitionism of the sort that humor endorses. So I don't think that we have any sort of epistemic access to like non-natural facts of the sort that he does. So I at least don't think intuitions have the powers or capacities or ability to achieve the sorts of outputs he thinks that they can. So that might be an issue. I don't know if that issue would be one that's contained in the notion of an intuition, though, or whether the problem would be located elsewhere. Like, I deny that there's synthetic a priori knowledge or something. And so there'd be some other reason why I would say we can't have intuitions of that kind. I don't know. But I think that there remain open questions here. Let's see if there's anything more he says.
Like whatever your analysis of seems or appears, when you have an intuition, like when you have an ethical intuition, you're saying that some ethical proposition seems true to you, and it's not the result of argument, right? But so it seems true to you upon reflecting on it intellectually.
Yeah, so I don't know why he's adding that reflect on it intellectually, because intuition is used in other cases. So one of the major differences is that I don't really think whatever kinds of judgments I would be describing as intuitions, I don't think that they have the kind of I'm skeptical that they have the kind of power that humor thinks that they have. And other people are too. So I'm not the only one that doesn't think, for instance, that intuitions can serve as evidence, or that you're justified in believing in intuitions in the absence of defeaters. Like intuitions are defeasible, provide defeasible evidence for whatever it is you're inclined to believe. That is, I haven't seen a survey, but I suspect a very good portion, maybe a majority of philosophers would not endorse that. And so if that's the case, why they think that might come down to differences in their conception of what intuitions are and how they work. So I think when he says it doesn't really matter what your analysis is, I don't know exactly what he means by that. Maybe he means it doesn't really matter for the purposes of establishing that intuitions are exclusive, like whatever they are. For the purposes of this conversation, they are these non-inferential outputs. If he says it doesn't matter for that purpose, that seems fine. If he's saying it doesn't matter in some broader sense, that would be objectionable. But I'm not sure that he is, and I can't tell from the context that he is. So I don't know what to make of that. So it might be that we would not really have a disagreement here. Like we wouldn't have a disagreement about the specific point he's making here, but I think that there are still these broader questions, and I do think he's kind of brushing past those and not giving them as much due as I think that they deserve.
And so I put it that way because there are different kinds of appearances. There's like sensory appearances where something seems to be the case when you look at it or listen or smell or whatever. Okay, but then there's some things that seem true when you just think about them intellectually, like the shortest path between 2 points must be a straight line. When you think about that, that just seems true.
See, I have trouble with that. It just seems true. What does he mean by that? When he reports things seeming true, does it have any particular kind of phenomenology? And if so, what is that phenomenology? I don't have phenomenology associated with thinking things through, like, is 11 a prime? Like, consider the claim 11 is a prime number. Does that seem true to you? Like, I know that it's true. I believe that it's true. But nothing about that seems true. And, one of the things that got me into philosophy was when I was presented with trolley problems, I was asked whether I had an intuition about whether it's permissible to pull the switch and permissible to push the person off the bridge in the footbridge scenario. And the answer is no. I don't. It doesn't seem to me that you should or shouldn't. I don't really know what that means when someone says that. I don't have any specific phenomenology or experiential states associated with the consideration of the scenarios. I can reflect on them, and I can tell you things like, well, in the switch case, I think that you should pull the switch. Like I would, and what I mean by that is I would favor pulling the switch. I would hope I would pull the switch. I prefer if other people pull the switch. I think allowing the train to kill just one person and save 5 in the process, that's the right thing to do. I like that. Yeah. And then in the footbridge case, my thoughts are, you know what? Doesn't really see, you're still killing one person to save 5 people. I don't see a big difference between knowingly bringing about a person's death and actively bringing about their death in terms of the ethical status of the action. But then there's like how I would feel about it. Could I pull a switch? Maybe. I think so. Could I push a person? I don't think so. I don't think I'd be able to do it. And so, I recall I was in an intro to ethics course as an undergrad, and I recall having that reaction like, well, I wouldn't want to push a person. I would feel bad about it. And I don't think that I would. But, well, technically, it's kind of like the other scenario. So I remember having thoughts about it and being able to predict what I think I would do, and having various other sorts of judgments about it. But I didn't have this like spidey sense that you should pull on the switch and you shouldn't push in the footbridge scenario. I didn't have that. I've never had that. I don't know what that experience is like. And, to the extent that it sounds like philosophers are reporting it, there's a few things that could be going on here. It could be that they have, ordinary psychological processes intact, that these sorts of processes are just totally just normal, ordinary, and I'm the weirdo. There's something idiosyncratic about me. There's something wrong with my psychology. It could be the opposite. It could be that actually I'm normal and that they've all been inducted into a strange way of thinking where they're convinced that they have these, intuitions, and that actually they're making a kind of shared conceptual error. Now, that might sound really weird, but one of the comparisons I've been appealing to lately is that some people claim that they can see auras. So when they look at a person, they can see like bands of color around the person that might tell them something about the person's personality or spiritual state or something like that. Now, I don't think everybody that reports seeing auras is a liar. I think people think that they can see them. And so they might be having some sort of pseudo-perceptual experiential state that is associated with their reports of auras. So how does that happen? Well, I don't think it's just people getting hit in the head. I think people can be trained to see things that aren't really there, like literally visually see things, or have some sort of like sub-visual quasi-phenomenal state of some kind. So if that's possible, and I think it is, it's possible that people can be taught or inducted into reporting certain kinds of phenomenology, whether they develop the capacity to have some sort of associated phenomenology, or whether they're actually misreporting phenomenology that is actually pretty similar to or the same as other people. I don't know. But my current working hypothesis is that intuition talk, at least some of intuition talk among some philosophers, actually involves a type of pseudopsychology, a type of pseudo-phenomenology where they have gotten into the habit of speaking, writing, using certain language in particular sorts of ways with one another in a way that's sufficiently mutually reinforcing that they've convinced themselves that they have a distinct type of phenomenology that they in fact don't have, or that they have a kind of, only way to put it is a type of intellectual hallucination, that one can experience the outputs of one's intellectual beliefs or judgments as some sort of quasi-perceptual state, that one is seeing that 2 + 2 = 4. And one might report, yeah, it seems that it's true. I'm having an experience of the truthness of it. I think that people can be basically inducted into mistakenly thinking that this is a legitimate type of psychological state, when really it's a kind of phantom state that one has learned to have because one's been inducted into an academic field that tells you, yeah, this is the thing that you have and everybody has them. And if you report not having them, then you're conceptually impoverished. And who wants to be left out? So you better have them. So I think something like that is going on. Maybe there's other things that could be going on too. All right. Ephesus says, what are your thoughts on Spinoza's meta-ethics? How can we categorize it? Don't know enough about Spinoza's meta-ethics. Noah Birnbaum says, do you understand why Hume's point follows from his initial meta-philosophy stuff about phenomenal conservatism? I see what holds from there, but I just disagree with the meta-philosophical points. I'm not sure what you're getting at specifically. So Noah continues, I think he would make the point that your method of psychologizing these mental intuition things is self-defeating because we learn about basic things via these. So according to this position, we can't use these weaker psychology claims to disprove these deep claims. Yeah, I that seems like that would be begging the question if someone were to do that. Like, you have to use intuitions in order to discuss whether or not we have intuitions. No, I don't. Like, if someone wants to make that claim, I'd love to see what the argument for that would be. Zachman sends, by the way, have you done reactions to IP's videos on moral realism or relativism, but not error theory? Is that a question or a statement? There's a question mark. Yeah, I looked at the error theory video. I think it was you or somebody else recommended I have a look at that video. And the error theory video is like, well, Mackie says this, Mackie says that, Mackie says this, Mackie says that. There wasn't a lot from it. Like, what am I going to do? I could go check if Mackie says those things, then maybe criticize him or not. But I'm not going to go crack open Inventing Right and Wrong and like cross-reference all the claims that he makes. He was live streaming right now, actually. Let me see if he's still doing it. IP, Inspiring Philosophy, that is. Yeah, he's still currently live streaming, and we got 23 people here. He's got 209. So he's doing a lot better than me. So I do think that he has 446,000 subscribers. So he's got 10 times as he's got less than 10 times as many people watching a stream, but he has 400 and, well, I guess like more like 250 or 300,000 times as many subscribers as me. So wait, 300, what am I talking about? 300 times as many. I can't do math. Like 300 times as many, whatever that would be. So he should be having 300 times as many people watching his channel, but he doesn't. So we're doing, well, this, diminishing returns, that sort of thing. Anyway, I don't think I'm going to do a reaction to Inspiring Philosophy's video on error theory. So Patrick says, Feynman gave an example of meeting philosophers who believed a brick was an object with properties attached to it. To him, he was one of the greatest physicists. They just learned to think weirdly. Yeah, where does he talk about that? So a brick was an object with properties attached to it. Yeah, I really don't like philosophers talking about properties. Like, this thing has properties. It's so weird when they talk about things having properties. Like, I'm not saying there's necessarily something wrong with it, but a lot of times when they start talking about things having properties, it starts to sound really mysterious and weird to me. Nitty says, there's a hilarious live debate made by Jim Dobbs, Can Secularism Ground Morality, and the theists are having a field day. Is that currently going on? You should view that next. Let's see. Yeah, it's going on right now. 240 watching. Jesus. I see Godless Engineer there. Wow, that's a lot. Can you live stream a live stream? We could stop and go have a look at that. I can have a look at. That seems a little weird. I don't really want to live stream a live stream. David Hume says a brick is a brick. Maybe I should put that on a t-shirt. A brick is a brick. A brick. David continues. A brick is a particular arrangement of atoms at a particular place, and that'd be for mereological nihilism. Okay. Noah says, how would you appeal to external world stuff or rejecting intuitions on the basis of non-intuitions? Not saying you can't, just interested in how. How would you appeal to of rejecting intuitions on the basis of non-intuitions? Well, if it's not clear what an intuition is, why would I grant that I have to use them? I have to use what exactly? You still have to be very specific about what it is you're saying that I have to have. Oh, right. Yeah, Patrick says do it. Do you mean go check out their conversation? I don't think I want to check that out. That doesn't sound like that's going to be fun to do. All right, let's see if there's any more of this conversation with humor that is worth having a look at. And then if not, then we'll have a look at another video. Where is the humor video? Here it is.
Okay, so, and then, sometimes when a thing seems true to you intellectually, it's because it seems true in the light of some certain considerations that support it. But then there are times when something seems true just directly, if I'm thinking about that without thinking about reasons for it. Okay, so the case where the thing seems true intellectually, directly, that's an intuition. There's no question that we have them. All you have to do.
Yeah, I wonder about this. Like, intellectually, like he throws in some extra terminology. Why does he throw in the term intellectually? Is that a particular kind of thing that occurs, like an intellectual seeming, rather than like, okay, so it seems to me that my name is Lance. Is that intellectual? What count? Does it matter if something is intellectual or not? And if it does, if it doesn't matter, why is he saying it? If it does matter, in what way does it matter? Like, there's a lot of terminology getting thrown around here, and I feel like this deserves a lot more unpacking and laying it all out. And if he does do this somewhere, I'd love to see it.
Is like, think about one of these things, like, 2 is more than 1, and then it will seem true to you. And okay, and you won't be.
Yeah, see, like when I think about mathematics, I don't think things seem true for simple like if you tell me what's 5 times 5, 25. Well, in that case, it's not that 25 seems true. It's that I memorized times tables when I was in like 2nd or 3rd grade or something, and so I'm recalling something. That's a memory. In other sorts of cases, I might actually have to think it through for a minute. So if you ask me if 11 is a prime number, I'm going to say yes. If you ask me if, I don't know, 91 is a prime number, I'd have to think about it. I don't know. So see, I chose something that seems kind of prime number-y-ish. Let me look it up. Is it a prime number? Nope, it's not a prime number. 7 and 13, it looks like. See, so it looks like it could have been a prime number, and it's not. So unless Google is stupid. No, 91 is not a prime number. Yes, 1, 7, 13, 91. So it's got other factors, so it's not a prime number. So that something can seem kind of prime numbery-ish, especially if you go up in numbers, because I didn't memorize those. I don't think about prime numbers all day. And so I would have to reason through. And if I was looking at 91, I'd have to think about it. I might get out pen and paper, and like, can I factor this? And I'd probably pick some low digit stuff. Is it divisible by this? Is it divisible by that? And then I'm going to have a set of heuristics. Like, obviously, it's not divisible by like 4. Then I'd have to think it through. So in that kind of case, I wouldn't consider that a seeming, like mathematical stuff. There's going to be inferential processes for more difficult math and non-inferential processes for the other stuff. But the non-inferential processes are things like memory. So what the hell is an intellectual like an intellectual seeming? What the hell is that? I don't know if I have those. And you might say, but what about the rules of logic? Like, surely, like, I don't know, transitivity or identity. So those seem true. No, those are, I view them as conventions that have opted to employ in most contexts. I'm not even like, it's not like I think, I don't have the same view about what logic is as I suspect humor does, and that many philosophers do. I see, I'm an empiricist about logic too. I take systems of logic to be sets of conventions or rules that are no different than the rules of monopoly. We use them, we test them, they work well, we keep using them. If they stop working, I'll stop using them. Are they going to stop working? I very much doubt it, and I would bet against anybody that thinks they would. And so, logic for me is effectively about as stable as I think someone that thinks it captures these like pure immutable truths that float in the universe or something thinks they are. For me, functionally, they're pretty much the same. But like in terms of the underlying metaphysics, I don't have that view about them. And so they don't seem true to me. That's not how I experience logic. So I don't experience math that way. I don't experience logic that way. I don't experience morality that way. So when it comes to morality, it's a lot closer to my judgments about like food or something like that. One moment, got dogs barking. Hey guys, it's okay. Nothing going on. It's okay. It's okay. So when it comes to like you could just run through these sorts of things. When I think about like my food preferences, I rely on memory. Sometimes I might imagine what if you ask me, hey, would you like this? Would you like mixing peanut butter and some fruit I've never mixed it with, dragon fruit? This doesn't sound terrible. But it's not like, peanut butter and banana. That's a magic combination. So I could think about I could try to imagine the phenomenology associated with tasting those foods and mixing them in my mind. It makes me think of Ratatouille when is the rat Remy when he's thinking of, I think he has like strawberry and cheese or something, and there's like fireworks. It's cool. It's like actually visually illustrating the phenomenology of combining food in your mind. So when I think about these various sorts of things, I don't notice at any point in my experience of the world intellectual seemings. I don't think that I have those. Maybe someone in the chat could give me an example of something and see if I have an intellectual seeming about it. Robert Russell says, what do you mean by could have been a prime number? Something about my epistemic status in relation to it. Like if you give me the number 88, I'm going to go, of course, that's not a prime number. It's going to be divisible by 8 and what, 11? So if you give me a number like that, it's just sort of like I can do that. Like I know what is required to be a prime number. So if you give me something like 88, I could say I can see that it's divisible by those things. But what's actually going on there? I'm not having any phenomenology there. I'm not experiencing anything. So nothing seems to me in any experiential sense. Is that what he's talking about? Or is he using seeming language even if there's no experience associated with it? Like I just don't know what the phenomenology is supposed to be when people are reporting these sorts of things. Because as far as I could tell, I don't have phenomenology in those cases. In some cases, there might be like visual. I might do mental imagery for some types of mathematical operations, but I don't know that I do so consistently or reliably. I don't know. I mean, I'd really have to stop and start doing a bunch of math and see what's actually going on with me. Patrick says, oh, right. But sorry, Robin, but like could have been a prime number. So then when you take something like 91, I don't have I'm not immediately spotting what the factors would be and see, look, I'm using like visual metaphors. And so I'd have to think about it. And then and I might have to think, okay, well, it's not divisible by 2. Is it divisible by 3? Well, no, because then the digits should add up to something divisible by 3 and they don't. So 4, no, 5, no, 6, no, 7, no. 7? Huh. What is 7? What are the like when you start multiplying 7? What do you get? Doesn't look like it, but it turns out I think that it actually is. So like you have to start multiplying. It's 13. It's 7 and 13, right? Yeah, so it is 7. So it would turn out it would be 7. So 7, it wasn't immediately obvious. And 7, okay. So and now that I'm thinking about it, now I'm thinking, okay, you drop 7 into it, you get 21. So there's 3 left. It's 7. It goes into 21 3 times, so 13. So 7 and 13. So if I actually start thinking about it, I start being able to do like I'm not putting any effort in because it's like real time. But the moment I do, like it's not instantaneous. I would have to think about it. Whereas for 88, or let's say 10,000, 10,000 is not a prime number. I don't have to think about that for more than a second. Obviously, 10,000 is not a prime number. So how about 1,000,002? Not a prime number. Or so in certain cases, you have enough of these internalized rules that you can tell if something's a prime number. Versus what about 117? I don't know. I'd have to stop and get it up pen and paper and start thinking about it for a while, and it'd be really annoying. I don't practice mental math for that crap. But nothing special experiential is going on here. So I don't have intellectual seemings about this stuff. Patrick says, Lance, you seem an intuition is an intellectual seeming, and as a heuristic seeming, mental seeming, it's seemings all the way down. Okay, I think you're just making a joke. Nitty says, if nobody had a definition of prime, would 11 be prime? I don't like questions like that. You just have to disambiguate them. So maybe you're intentionally asking the question to be cheeky or something. Theology difference is probably inferential versus non-inferential beliefs. Yeah, I'm not sure that we can call them beliefs because people can report an intuition and then say that they don't believe the intuition. So an intuition, at least in some cases, is not a belief. Yeah, so the law of non-contradiction. No, I don't experience that as seeming true. It's not epistemically accessible for you to determine that it's not a prime. Well, it is epistemically accessible, just requires at least some minimal degree of effort. So now that I've discussed this so much, now in the future, I might, if someone says, hey, is 91 a prime number? I might go, yeah, because I'll remember this conversation in some way. It'll be internalized in me that it's a prime number. Immediately, that is. Right, yeah, so it's not immediately. I don't immediately apprehend that it's a prime number. Now I do, now that I've actually looked at the factors and stuff. Well, really, even looking at it, it wasn't obvious because I saw the 7 and 13, and then I started talking, and then I forgot about the 7. And then when I came back to it, I'm like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? No, not. Oh, okay. Now I can see it. So I might use that language, but that language is metaphorical. I'm not actually having any particular phenomenology. Patrick says, what about the humor example? It seems like if something is completely brown in color, it's impossible that it's partially blue. No, I have no phenomenology with that. Patrick says, I think he gives examples of other things like that, a priori logical truism, which he thinks are based on intellectual seemings. Yeah, they're not for me, so I don't know what the heck other people are experiencing. Nady says, by the way, magenta doesn't exist. What on earth does that mean? Robin says, appreciate you explaining your thought process. Yeah, I don't even know if I'm explaining it that well. So Patrick says, the joke is you directly ask him what an intuition is, he replies with an equally inexplicable term. Yeah, sure. So I don't really think that he's doing quite that here. I do think people do that in other contexts, but I'm not seeing that here. Okay, so I need to take a quick little break, and I'll be back in a minute. So hold up, everybody. Be right back. It's only going to be a minute or two. All right, I'm back. Told you be quick. Okay. All right, I see a few more comments of people being silly. I see other people saying magenta doesn't exist. Is this some kind of conspiracy? Color eliminativism, I guess. Patrick says actually only magenta exists. Supercritical Snake says magenta isn't a wavelength of light, it's just our brains interpreting red and blue signals simultaneously. Is that what's meant when they're saying magenta is not a color? Okay, let's see if there's anything else in this talk. I mean, there's lots of meta-ethics stuff here, but I don't want to just review another humor video after, we just had a conversation.
And there have to be cases where it's not based on reasoning, because otherwise you have an infinite regress. So, okay. And then, examples like there's this famous example where there are 5 people who need organ transplants in the hospital, and there's one healthy patient who is somehow compatible with the other 5. And so the question is, should we kill the healthy patient so that we could take his organs and give it to the 5 people who need them?
Right. So consider the organ transplant case, right? So a healthy person goes into the hospital. You're the surgeon. You could harvest 5 organs from that person and save 5 people, each of who needs an organ like a liver, heart, lungs, whatever. Should you do it? I don't have any phenomenology associated with that. So if you ask me, should you do it? What are you asking me? Are you asking me if I approve of doctors doing that as a general rule? No. If it's an isolated case, do I think that would maximize utility? Yes, assuming all of the things that you stipulate, like that all of the surgeries are going to be successful, that they're not excruciatingly painful, that all the people are of equal approximate health, otherwise, blah, 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 blah. You have to stipulate all the sort of provisos and everything. And once you do that, then yeah, it maximizes utility. Would I want to maximize utility in some isolated case? don't know. I don't know. I don't have an intuition about that. I just don't. I don't know what's going on with people that report having intuitions like that. Now, if you tell me, hey, do you think it would be wrong to like just punch a person for fun? Well, if you're asking me like, do I disapprove of it? Yes, I disapprove of it. But again, there's nothing intellectual about that. I'm telling you about my attitudes. If you ask me like what's an intellectual question? Do I think the theory of evolution is true? Like, does natural selection account for biological diversity in Earth? Yes. Like I'm not using some sort of inferential process to draw that conclusion. But again, it's like, well, I read a bunch of stuff and I was convinced in the past, and so that's something I recall that I'm committed to. So is that a memory? It's not. There's no intellectual. I don't have some intellectual analog to perception that I'm seeing that evolution is true, like the theory of evolution is true. What the hell? Like, what is going on with people? Like, I don't know what phenomenology humor has or claims to have. It's just super unclear to me.
And that will save 5 lives. Okay, and 5 is more than 1, so how should we do it? And almost everyone has an immediate reaction that you should not do that.
See, so people have an immediate reaction that you shouldn't do that. So what exactly is going on with people psychologically when they're reacting to that? So if we want to say that they have a psychological state that's an intuition, what is that? Right? So if for whatever reason in a study you gave people $100, I think they'd be kind of happy. Or if you complimented somebody, they would feel good about themselves. Or if you insulted, so the participant in the lab comes into the study and they think they're going to walking down the hallway to fill out a survey, and someone bumps into them and says, you stupid piece of shit, something like that. You piss them off, right? You can induce emotions in people, and emotions can be studied as a psychological phenomenon. There's a whole bunch of empirical evidence we can have for what emotions are and how they work and what facial expressions they correspond to. We can get cross-cultural research and show that people all over the world can do a pretty good job of converging on and recognizing and correctly identifying emotional expressions on other people from different cultures. There's so much evidence we could get about what emotions are and how they work. You could do the same thing for memories. You could do the same things for all sorts of psychological processes. Has anyone done this for intuitions? What the hell are they? It doesn't seem like the fact that we're talking about psychology here is being taken seriously by humor or anybody else. Like if we're going to talk about psychological phenomena, let's study them empirically. Why aren't people doing this? I just find that weird. So yeah, sure, people are going to have a reaction. So if you take someone's money, they're going to have a reaction. They're going to be upset. Does that mean they're having an intuition that you shouldn't have done it? Like if you describe some scenario, hey, do you think it would be morally wrong for a person to brutally murder people for fun? Yeah. I'll have a reaction to that. Reaction is, yeah, that's wrong. What the hell's wrong with that person? But am I having an intuition? I'm intellectually seeing that it's true that they shouldn't do that? What the hell is that? I don't have that. I don't have that. At least I don't think I have that. And so, look, either I do have that, but I don't think I have that. That would seem to indicate that people can be unaware of phenomenology that they do have. Well, maybe it's possible for people to report having phenomenology that they don't have. Like, does this go both ways? So that's a possibility. Or I don't, in fact, have it. And so is there something wrong with me? Or are there cognitive differences? So you could have this like cognitive diversity hypothesis. Maybe some people have intuitions and some people don't. I don't find that plausible, but hey, there's aphantasia and other sorts of cognitive differences. Some people don't have mental imagery. Some people don't have an internal monologue. Maybe some people don't have intuitions. I don't think so, though. I think that the people reporting in having intuitions are having like phantom phenomenology.
So like that's an ethical intuition.
Is it?
You
what does that mean?
Dispute whether that's a justification for believing that it's really wrong, but you can't really dispute that people have that intuition.
I'm disputing it. I don't think we have sufficient clarity to say whether we have them or we don't have them. So I'm not saying we don't have them. I'm saying insufficient data. Like there's insufficient clarification about what exactly we're talking about for me to say whether or not people are having intuitions in that case or not. I'd want to be clear on what that would mean, what that would entail, how we would know whether they're having intuitions. And I'm not convinced by some sort of like armchair declaration by fiat that, well, whatever it is, that it's an intuition. That's not good enough for me. Okay, I think that's it for that video. All right, someone sent me one today that had Ben Shapiro in it, so we're gonna have a look at that one. Oh wow, hour and 15 for like a 2-minute clip. All right. So this is supposed to have meta ethics in it, and I saved it right at the part where Alex O'Connor and Ben Shapiro are talking. Alex O'Connor says something about how he's an emotivist. I'm still actually curious why he's an emotivist, because I don't really understand why he's an emotivist. I've never heard him really argue for it. He'll just tell people he's an emotivist. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You could tell people, like if I'm having a discussion with people, I might say I'm an anti-realist and not argue for it. So it's not a criticism. I don't know why he's an emotivist. I'd be really curious to hear from Alex as to why that's the case. I don't know if he has a video on it. But yeah, Ben Shapiro here is going to talk about meta ethics. So let's see what he has to say.
That to me seems a dangerous cocktail that we drink at our peril.
So many things there, and so much that you're saying is quite brilliant. I actually thought you were going in a different direction with that last example, which I'll explain in a second. So yeah, to start with the very beginning, obviously so there are many problems with the motivism. Alistair McIntyre does a good job sort of breaking down the problems with the motivism. But
I'm curious if you asked him, okay, what are McIntyre's critiques of emotivism? I wonder what he would say. Like, I'm just surprised he would say something like that he's aware of critiques of emotivism, and McIntyre in particular. It's like, yeah, well, okay.
The sort of idea that there have to be certain moral absolutes that are beyond contention.
Yeah, so it looks like he's not going to unpack those critiques. Like, hey, McIntyre has these critiques. Okay, well, what are they? He's just making a reference to them. That doesn't seem like it adds much to the discussion. But let me take this back, because he's going to start pivoting from the discussion of emotivism. So say, yeah, okay, you're an emotivist. There's critiques of that. Anyway, and then he's going to move
sort of breaking down the problems with emotivism. But the sort of idea that there have to be certain moral absolutes that are beyond contention. And those moral absolutes have to be universally accepted. You can ground that, I suppose, in a sort of descriptive universe. The problem is that, to go back to your example, which again I think is a really interesting one, if a man comes to kill me, I think the real question of religion versus non-religion in the utility sphere here is it more likely that a man is going to come to kill you being a devotee of a religion that says that he must kill you? Or is it more likely that a man is going to kill you out of self-interest because he is not a devotee of a God who says that killing is wrong? So if you are faced with these two alternatives, to kind of remove your example one step, the question is why the man has come to kill you. I mean, that's your premise is the man has come to kill you because God told him to, and so he can't be dissuaded by force. Agreed. We see that full scale in the real world on a fairly regular basis. It is also true that over the course of human history, men have come to kill one another on the basis of self-interest in extraordinary amounts of the time. Tribal self-interest, particularly, having no particular relationship with God, just the idea that I want to kill you over territory, I want to kill you over resources, I want to kill you because you're not a member of.
Where's the meta ethics? I'm gonna drop this if I don't see meta ethics soon.
My immediate kin family, or because you killed a member of my kin family, and so in revenge I need to kill a member of your kin family. The entire, to borrow from your language, the entire sort of evolution of religion on a utility basis would have been to create moral absolutes that are applicable more broadly than to you and your friends.
What?
Entire, to borrow from your language, the entire sort of evolution of religion on a utility basis would have been to create moral absolutes that are applicable more broadly than to you and your friends. Any morality that can be created on an individual level is inherently dangerous because you can immediately graft that morality onto your personal self-interest. The entire purpose of religion, whether you want to ground that in evolutionary brain functionings or whether you want to ground that in revelation, the entire purpose of religion on a utility level is to remove morality from the purview of my special interest and to say, here are things that I cannot do, even if they are in my interest, because there is a higher power that says I cannot do these things. I think that a society that does not have these moral absolutes is in deep trouble. A society that refuses to say that there are certain absolutes that cannot be crossed under any circumstances that are universally applicable, it reduces things that we all take for granted, like equal justice before the law, like the idea that the law is supposed to equally apply to everybody, whether they're a member of your family or whether they're not. And there are broad.
So he's actually making a claim. I got to say, not a fan of Ben Shapiro, but he's making an interesting claim here about the kind of like sociology of religion, like what role it serves. That basically, to the extent that the rules are outsourced to whether, I guess you could even say whether it's imaginary or not, whether they're placed under the purview of some external authority to our own consciences or, contractual agreements, so like whatever intersubjective agreement or personal attitudes or beliefs, some sort of non-stance dependent source or non-subjective source that's at least not dependent on human contrivances. Which I guess the irony here would be for me that I think that the religions would be contrivances, that this has some sort of practical benefit. I don't know if that's true or not. That seems like a precarious speculative claim that basically putting certain sorts of moral precepts under the purview of a god, like they're from God, they're commands issued by God rather than by people, yield some sort of practical benefits. Could be true. I don't know if that would be true or not, but it's not meta ethics, so don't have much to say about that. Yeah, guess there's not much to cover there. He just doesn't talk about meta ethics. All right. Yeah, it's interesting. The same thing happened with Sam Harris, where Alex O'Connor was talking to him, and Alex would bring up meta-ethical points, and then Ben Shapiro, or sorry, Sam. Why am I mixing people up? Alex would talk about meta-ethics, and then Sam Harris would just not talk about meta-ethics in response. And Ben Shapiro does that here too. He makes this like one quick point about how someone has dealt with the meta-ethical claims that Alex is making, and then he moves on to this sort of like sociological or psychological speculative hypothesis about the practical benefits of religion, like, hey, well, grounding it in God rather than in, some sort of constructivist or stance-dependent human contrivance view is like important. The alternative is dangerous. Those are empirical claims. I'm not in a position to evaluate them. I'm very skeptical of them. I don't, I wouldn't go so far as to say like some people are, religions cause all wars, and no, I don't know. Religions are mixed bags. They can, promote certain sorts of pro-social behavior. They can have, they can make people do really nasty things or really good things, depending on the context. But I don't. This is already going outside the purview of what I would be well informed about. So, if I wanted to know, hey, does religion have net positive or net negative effects on society? That's going to be an incredibly complicated question. You're going to have to dig into a bunch of history, sociology, psychology, criminology. I mean, there's so many fields. You'd have to be digging in anthropology. Economic stuff. That would be a very synthetic position that would require drawing, like a synthetic topic that would require, in other words, I mean, like synthesizing topics from a wide range of fields. Yeah, just not in a position to evaluate that. That's something you'd have to do a deep dive into the research to look at. I know Inspiring Philosophy has been arguing that religion is good for society. I am very, very suspicious. I think he specifically emphasizes Christianity is, but I'm not convinced of that. So, yeah, I'm not sure I have much more to say on that. It's just not meta ethics. All right, do we have anything else to cover? I'm not sure that we do. All right. Anyone have comments? Otherwise, I guess I'll just close the stream out. It doesn't have to go for 2 or 3 hours. Yeah, Patrick's immediate pivot away from meta ethics. David Hume, yeah, become ideal observer theorist, no God needed. Yeah, but that's going to lack the kind of authoritative push. Like, oh, a hypothetical perfect being would agree with me. Okay, well, who cares? God will kick your ass if you don't do what he says. So maybe that matters for people. All right. Patrick says, Lance, what are you up to? what are you working on, papers or academic supplies? Next paper is going to be a free will paper I've been sitting on for a long time. So going to tidy it up and submit it for publication. I did have a paper published like this past week. Let me see if I could pull that up. Give me a second. 1 second. How do I not remember the name of my own paper? Got it. No, it's sending me to the wrong place. Ah, here we go. It might actually be accessible, even though it may eventually go behind a paywall. It's the page is taking an eternity to load. Give it a second. Maybe could you comment on what Ben Shapiro was referencing to giving good arguments against emotivism? I don't know what you're asking me. He didn't really address emotivism. Theology scholar says, what are your thoughts on the replay argument? I have no idea what the replay argument is. All right, there's the article. See if I can pin it. Patrick asked, do you have any plans for non-meta-ethics stream? This wasn't really a meta-ethics stream. I don't think we talked about, like I was talking about intuitions, not meta-ethics. Yeah, this is weird because you're saying enjoy these, but I'd enjoy other philosophy topics treated from your POV too. But this wasn't meta-ethics. This was intuitions and meta-philosophy. What are you talking about? Okay. All right, so I pinned that. So you could find that paper. And other than that, honestly, I haven't been working on a lot of the academic stuff I should be working on. The free will paper is the big one. There's other papers that are in various states. I don't know how much I want to talk about where I'm at with the academic stuff. So Mind Onion asks, anything worth discussing in meta? Yeah, so it's not that I can't address those questions. It's just I don't know how unfathomably boring it would be for me to start talking about like specific plans that I have for like which paper I'm going to write next, how I'm going to do it, what I'm going to do. It's not. I don't think it'd make for interesting discussion. If you really want to know, I guess like message me. You can email me. I could tell you what I'm working on. But I don't know. I don't know. You know what? No, don't even bother doing that. I don't think it'd be very interesting. Okay. Anything worth discussing in meta ethics? I mean, I'm kind of talking about that when I talk about intuitions. So anything worth discussing in meta ethics? I mean, one thing I've been asking lately, I guess you could say this is meta ethics, is I'm kind of revisiting this topic. I've been revisiting it over a couple of years. Just historically speaking, over the 20th century, when philosophers are talking about cognitivism, non-cognitivism, and various sorts of semantic theses, are they making empirical claims or not? It's not entirely clear to me whether they take the claims to be empirical, and if they do, what kind of methods they think are the best way to address those questions. So, but I feel like I'm running out of steam here. I feel like maybe I'm done. I don't know. I guess I just don't feel like developing on that more. Okay. Oh, I'm getting lots of questions. I guess I'll try to address these, even if I give short. Oh, maybe it's good. I'm not in the mood for monologuing. All right. Through the Lens says, you plan to have talks with anyone doing any disciplinary psych and phil? I imagine there are a few far apart. Yeah, there's more people than you might think doing it. But yeah, I'm going to be talking to some of those people. It's probably mostly going to be people doing experimental philosophy. So Patrick says, fair enough. I mostly heard intuition and talked about in reference to moral realism in these circles that I joined late. Yeah, and that whole talk is actually about meta ethics, but that specific portion wasn't directly about meta ethics. So yeah, I mean, I consider this meta philosophy. Jack says, when is the Q&A coming out? When the semester is over. So it's going to be sometime in December, because that one's I'm going to need to sit down and really have like a block of time. That's going to take more than a day for me to do, because there were so many questions, and it's going to take a lot of recording and editing and looking through the questions and putting them in some kind of coherent order. That's like a whole project now. So I did that prematurely. I was all excited. Oh, I'm going to do an AMA. And then I got just too busy, and there's just too many other things that are priorities. So it's going to have to be December. And that'll be probably one of the big projects before I take a break. So it will be coming out in December. I know that's like 4 months or something after I posted initially, but I'll get to it. All right. I think that's it. I think I'm done. I think I'm just out of juice today. All right, everybody. I will catch y'all later. See y'all.